Okay, I think that's everyone. If that's not, please verbally stop me now. Advantage 1 is cyber defense. In the most common center for cyber attacks on the U.S. Directed by the force types of computer computers on U.S. soil, owned by U.S. persons, targeting U.S. civilian assets. Their response is failing because ambiguous civilian and military authorities are undermining information during this grade and infrastructure hubs. Suspender 16. The employees 5 records that response predicate substance that are divisible into law enforcement outside acting military. This breaks on service safety, lacking in cyber crime. Phenomenal actually the PCA's implications that control no law enforcement nor the military. Can protect from China's military for the infiltrating use infrastructure establishments as a whole. The PCA's only principle. It bars cooperation. PCA is not prohibited using law enforcement support military efforts. Law enforcement contribute to information cyber attacks threaten direct civilian targets. PLA exploring use infrastructure civilian have greater access to info because will there be no prohibition military monitoring. This to counter composition involving the civilian sector would hence the response to law enforcement military get both of more access to more detailed data. Successful attacks trigger a Black Star scenario distinct from blackouts and an existential risk. Monarch 20. Power cannot be restored. It presents an existential threat. Black Star not speaking of the blackout is how one restores power. The entire vernacular can provide the question not how, but whether we survive the greatest artist interconnected machine in the world. The compromised generation technology sit together in ways that are not inherently together. Good fail, food scarcity, communication, seeds, garbage, oil, water. With her comes the lecture, absolute good transactions, absolute chaos, reading, re-emerge. Russia shut up, power attack, Ukraine attack against the US, catastrophic way across the entire grid. Take years, look at COVID. Reaching out, Delga, critical officer, one unexpected severe stress attack on the grid, gravity disruption, as well as the pandemic. Broadly, ripples of critical infrastructure turns over impact. Payment Armstrong 15. Risks of human civilization. Critical infrastructure. Small disruption. Cause non-linear effect. Cyber conflict. Trigger social conflict. Starvation. Cause great death and suffering. Conflict spread. And undermine the economic ecosystem. Cause society, poverty, wars, and climate change. And monocultures. Even attempts attacks cause nuclear retaliation. Or else 20 lead to military escalation. Trigger nuclear exchange. Solidity. Present conflict between Russia and the US. Attacking critical infrastructure. Make legacy to the aggressor. The other diminished stress. The world is sliding to major crisis and just out of control. No guaranteed access to we control. But malware spreads between interlinked system, causing use lose pressure and nuclear use to act on 20. Inadvertent escalation. Preparation time to escalate. Lead to state to play nuclear weapons. Malware did not nuclear. Nuclear minimize from less than intel about the target to say concerned about nuclear milling inclining crisis to in the worst light. Generic escalation states from PLS read out great risk sometimes these program might conclude nuclear forces through C3 about to but attack even if air gapping. Resolving jurisdictional ambiguity is vital to restore collaboration between key stakeholders. First, civilians. The potential for infiltrating to serve as a backdoor for military policing U.S. citizens undermines it. That's no 15. String info about cyber's valuable events, include awareness of threats and events, development of robust indicators, events, agility, rapid notification, predictability, process, component, emphasis, critical that if private entities share info for cybersecurity, info should be controlled by civilian rather than military agencies. Civilians are more transparent, privacy protections are more available. Military agencies info would mean less trust and less corporate participation. Thus, civilian control would increase security. Public authority inadequately addressed to ensure info were worked into backdoor wiretap for increased investigation on unrelated offenses. Doing so undermines independent investigations using info can be mined for crime. Streamlining the PCA solves the signals that data sharing is shielded from the DoD. As Johnson Alexander 12, the NSA is the DoD, the PCA, and legal authority to intercept the impact collecting in the US. We need to teach us for public faith. People have to know we are protecting civil liberties in transparent manner. They're the ones that set standards. Second is courts still strike down civil military cybersecurity due to potential infringement. Congressional clarification solves this. Alexander 16. Concerns about military law enforcement pressure courts use exclusion congressional response needed. Other skills to go free. Posing a threat to public safety. PCA must recess. We can choose one court to move the constitutionary rule. Two Congress should intervene to streamline the PCA. Congress preferable because that's in Congress. Courts will make adult use in varying degrees. Courts circumstances like a clarity. Congress should mandate PCA criminal section apply to the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. Ensure actually influence criminal sections with the mandate to issue guidance to ensure enforcement and criminal sections for violations. Third, the DoD. They're limiting involvement in infrastructure defense because the PCA is ambiguous as well as norm. Bracket 19. We face cyber attacks on the critical infrastructure when there's government involved. It's difficult. Companies who want their armed services more capability and organization teach us not have the resources legal. It gets complicated. It's just law enforcement can offensive involved. This process containment is going to come in the military. So folks seem to like to engage. Such true clarification solves this. It's the only way to greenlight permissible activities while deterring abuses. Alexander 16. Civilian military collaborations are enabled surveillance, continuing opportunities, featuring info, statutory guidance on personal parameters, how info about civilians together, shared and used to remove uncertainties for military and civilians, like congressional clear guidance and coupled enforcement of criminal sanctions, where deter behavior such as in Dreher. Should Congress let the status quo score to follow inconsistent applications and certainly continue to be judiciary, certain result in inconsistent outcome. The need for Congress to enact legislation becomes central. Congressional action provides clarity and parameters and certainty. Violators will be held accountable, but deter government to overreach independently. Clear separation of military and policing authority over cyber is modeled in Japan. Key to Japanese response to cybercrime. U.S. Domain 15. Interior evidence of military violating support of civil law is possible for military and police to share info in America. The military is not according to PCC, but there's an line between military is people wanted to civilians reach privacy. PCs are empty within Japan's constitution for protection. Attack the threat in the nation. Japan take a hint from America's role separation. Military and police to create a secure cyber to make a clear line between authority. Fear of Japanese civil military coordination. Risk hacks against nuclear power. Triggers meltdowns, military retail, and nuclear power globally. As Diamond 17. Exploit cyber attack nuclear materials. Japan logic bomb trigger meltdown interfering military response to connection to a custom to guide infiltrating plan control homes security. Forces delayed and confused move connect houses lead to more info who's control nuclear communities. Africans and cyber incidents delayed to construct activities. Source everywhere. Emulate the attack for cause mass disruption facing on nuclear meltdowns cause extinction. Silicon 15 nuclear fuel release system to the atmosphere. Non-president human catalyst system deleterious to food direct human contamination test fields and forests that display invertebrate and rotting variability and signature cycle fresh water comes right after no human can survive. Thus the plan the United States federal government should bar via criminal penalty the surveillance of United States persons by members of the United States Armed Forces for domestic pleasing purposes unless expressly authorized by the Constitution or an act of Congress. The advantage to a civil military relations. PCA restrictions on domestic military policing are eroding. It lies at the root of the politicized suspension of military prerogatives. Kyoto 20. Widespread military involvement in civilian law enforcement threats to liberty. There's currently no remedy for prosecution of PC involving the military police itself. As PC plan the rule will encourage compliance, refusal to send messages to PCs to relic easily discarded the required revitalization regarding use of combined military power. Congress abdicated government the military the Mexican Ocean. No hesitancy to achieve political objectives. E-great management children detention camps must be effective enforcement. Expanded military role in Timor makes nuclear war inevitable. A 2021 reset is necessary. Lead 20 military officers in worst case intention to inflict institutional biases and mountains in Timor. We die in chances of home scene risk of accidental war with China, Russia, and the SCS Republic. American enemies calculate risk nuclear use, regional conflict, strong civilian control of a great power. About it, to the balance civilian leadership often makes war inevitable, particularly as global crisis escalation and the unique context of the newest presidential transition. Legislative strictures on domestic military operations contain the erosion of civil military trust, which solved this goal beat all 20. The shared system of military implications are stability and transitions. Pentagon things are different this time. The outgoing president came from the Afghanistan, Iraq crisis around North Korea, Russia, and China. Adversaries may take advantage of problematic decisions of security. What is important. Have the team get off on the right foot from Seymour's standpoint. You can't legislatures, Congress, to elect a stress to decide what needs to be tightened. It must be beneficial. Manage transitional crises versus nuclear escalation. Claire 17 crises versus nuclear escalation, especially no crisis Baltic Sea. And middle change over from one administration to another. Time of certain given immediate inclination, part of testing leaders, U.S. resistance states until proxy wars inspiring Putin achieve its difficult divide ventures and distracting attention to dangerous reliance, nuclear use, nuclear weapons, overcoming defensive potential. A fire break seems to arrow nerve crisis may be nuclear military encroachment on civil authority. Not only is a major stressor on TMR, but also prevents their ability to effectively respond to truly existential threats like nuclear meltdowns, domestic and foreign terrorism, and pandemic spring of 17. Military forces in the ocean crazy morphing and quasi law enforcement organization also provides emergency first responder service for without being capable of effectively responding. The truly existential threats constant treatment every challenge as a crisis creates a major stress in TMR, but PC generally prohibits in military force and civilian law enforcement exemptions in military should not connected considered a significant resource emergency situation. Nuclear reactors the risk of catastrophic failure, Chernobyl, Fukushima, domestic insurgency, domestic right-wing terrorist groups and troops to contain the spread of disease, preventing massive outbreak and pandemics like a quick the ability of authority to maintain order use continually relied on military's effective means to counter negative effects of crisis will continue to have a secondary effect as an emergency service provider and a stable influence as long as the military avoids becoming a overtly politicized organization. This symbiotic relationship will function as stabilizing force. More broadly, weak CMR exacerbates every existential risk that's not royal. 16. Unparalleled crisis on global scale, when power relations are unpredictable, form cascading crises, threat to destabilization of fragile areas to disasters, climate change, pandemics, emerging national disasters, summer technology, impact critical infrastructure, regional conflict at the global stage, these complex civilian and military forces with many resetting attitudes, negotiating more effective models to emerging terror capacity to establish themselves, space electronic warfare, challenging civilian organizations, military forces to identify synergy, cyber, hyper-restrict cascading flows, and independent networks, hurting future crises necessitate that agencies broaden their scope to develop TMR. Restricting military surveillance is key. First, its unique license for mission creep to Sun on 10, utterly problems with domestic individuals, speeding authority provided DoD 3000 supports, and little question vulnerable to mission creep, the more DoD distributed info to law enforcement. More agencies requested the mushroom nuclear action collateral, the force protection needs to reinforce the need for clear parameters, insulate the military force mission creep, and providing protection. The guidelines of civilian authorities on limits. Second, it's uniquely symbolic. Son of 10, fake parameters, domestic intelligence appeal problem waiting to happen. There are no legal violations because the PhD structures the heart of the issue. The military comes involved. Domestic intelligence factor for military state emerges the mere prospect that info could be to influence will process under drastically compromise TMR. Whether actually mere proceed violation not only was for the anti-military side of congressional investigation in a world with the intel structure with far-reaching effect of the public perceives UD using info during as a sort of future delegate TMR could be upset. Statutory reform is key. This demand arose in 5. Problems PC can be resolved only through changes in the law. Piecemeal exception creates carves a maze through code and case law regulation compound the problem. The combined effects impossible. The emerging threat environment. I didn't fault the decision to make military activity respond necessary to respond. There will be habitual delay due to confusion, dire consequences either way. Oh shoot, I did not have the doc open. Criminal penalties are key. Walsh and Sullivan 18. 9th Circuit. Exclusionary rule for the PCA. Exclusionary rule for PCA does not deter future misconduct since the military does not have interest in prosecution. Those could get the evidence will not impact the military's criminal punishments and effective deterrent. It could be sent to prison and find the mere fact of the commander or chief could cause significant deterrent. Okay, one second. Okay.
Wait, good for cross-ex?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, did you send out that one card?
I think Kaylin's sending it right now.
Cool, I'm just going to wait for that.
Okay.
Cool, I think I got it. Okay, good now?
Yep.
The plan text specifies that you bar criminal penalties for domestic policing purposes unless expressly authorized. What acts of surveillance are expressly authorized by the Constitution and Act of Congress?
Well, first I would clarify that we bar via criminal penalty. We don't bar criminal penalty.
Yeah, sir.
Yeah, it imposes on the U.S. Armed Forces for domestic policing. Something that could be expressly authorized by an act of Congress could be if Congress authorizes the military in emergency situations to conduct surveillance domestically. The more important thing is that it resembles the actual text of the PCA, but rather expands that definition to include all members of the United States Armed Forces. So, unless expressly authorized by the Constitution Act of Congress is in the original PCA.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about this Japan internal link. The Yuasa and Madea evidence seems to say Japan has similar structures to the United States. Where do you think this evidence is predictive that Japan will model future changes to the PCA?
Yuasa and Maeda are Japanese constitutional scholars who are citing a court case where there was citing a U.S. court case where there was a conflict over domestic and military policing authority. We think that they apply that to the Japanese constitutional structure in the form of, like, it talks about how Japan's constitution needs to have a better separation between military policing authority. We can read better evidence than the TOC that better establishes the spillover warrant, but the card's pretty decent in establishing that Japan would take a hint from America's role separation in military and policing authority.
What does it mean to take a hint? Where does this evidence indicate that people within the government actually model and want such a change?
Well, these are Japanese constitutional scholars, so we think a lot of people
Constitutional
extract that-
scholars are people who look at the Constitution but not working in the government.
Well,
Why do you think people within the government will follow
they
such
analyze. Well, Japan is having similar conflicts between military and policing authority. We think that the terms Japan should like take a hint in this context means they would model the U.S. Clarifying the ambiguity between military and policing authority. But again, we'll read better TOC evidence to substantiate this.
I guess I'll wait for the 2AC. The Springer evidence indicates that military encroachment stops us from reacting to things like terrorism, pandemics. I think that's been happening for years. I think the U.S. government what has the U.S. government not been able to do respond to a pandemic like COVID because of this situation happening?
Our argument isn't about the current military being overstretched. Rather, it makes a predictive claim that if the military keeps responding to every single threat and encroaching on other areas in emergency response services, then they'll be overstretching resources in the future.
What's the brink for overstretching resources? Your evidence seems pretty good that this is an ongoing conflict. When is this going to happen? When are we going to reach that threshold?
Well, obviously, there's no exact brink for when the military would become overstretched, but our evidence makes a predictive claim, and we haven't made a claim that our military is overstretched in the status quo, which means that, like, unless you read a card that says they're already currently overstretched, then, like, we can win a predictive claim about
The
it being
Monarch
high now.
evidence about disrupting the grid and causing a blackout seems to rely on being interconnected. Parts of the grid, like in Texas, have gone down. Why didn't that take down the whole grid?
Texas was because of natural disasters, like, not cyber attacks.
Cool. So a cyber attack hits a part of the grid. Why will it suddenly spiral to the entirety of the grid?
Few warrants, Monarch says the grid is the largest interconnected machine in the world, comprised of generation technology that are stitched together. The piece of Acton evidence indicates that because systems are interlinked, it spreads between different systems and is designed to be destructive.
Okay.
No?
Now we can hear you.
So I'm guessing nobody heard me say 1 and C was sent because I was muted on my headphones, but it has been sent. It's 6 off in case in the order of the cyber advantage and then the CMR advantage. Has anybody not gotten it? If nobody stops me in 10 seconds, I'll just start speaking. Colonel Jester refers to entire conflict as an institution, people to follow Hampshire, skeptical, which is no conflict as an institution, substantial progress holds an approach to overall criminal justice, into more 70 health approach, central to substantial attacks in order for the divine courts of conduct capable of warning existing institutional changes, violations, plan, targets a subset of law enforcement system rather than changing policy across the entire area, voting issue for limits, long infinite absolute laws over stretching negative research, burn undermines, preparedness for all debates, next stop the Supreme Court ought to one, adopt their uniform, streamlined exclusion, rule evidence required via surveillance of the United States, reports of murders of the United States armed forces for domestic policing purposes, unless expressly authorized by Constitution Act of Congress, and to transfer civilian military surveillance authority and the NSA to the DHS or itself the effect of the after adoption of new exclusion rule PCA violation based on due process, thus send a deterrent signal and with the impacts of military incursion. 20 courts of athletics with the PCA violations were as well started PCA get achieved system undertaking misconduct in respect of constitutional courts after established wide routine violation in the participation failing law violate PCA tests of narrow violations every violation with their infrequent suppression and offer visible to individual conflicting use of military and force laws in additional making respect for contamination courts admit evidence obtained unlawfully to send a measure of illegal laws and enforce suppression enforce the important right to real estate testimony violation inside the 1 and 4th Amendment ritual goals should be deterrent encroachment the military violation loan triggers a conclusion remedy the due process prohibits invasions through legal process fruits of legal pressure towards suppression test or application next of the United States Congress and President of the United States should establish an 18-year term limit on the Supreme Court justice participation federal judiciary along with the backup provision stating to bar via criminal penalty surveillance United States person is by members of the United States Armed Forces domestic policing purpose expressly unless expressly authorized the Constitution Act of Congress if and only if the term limits were deemed unconstitutional. Solve the after limits unconstitutional. Mark 20 term limits are constitutional. Article 3 says about a judge hold the officer can get behavior this understanding the federal justice of life. Article 3 makes a distinction to 3 many fair courts on Article 3. 2 the president is a part of the nominated ambassadors is held just going to be able to bend their by statute. The Commonwealth sets a precedent for passive progressive legislation, clear constitutional provincial, but more durable climate approaches with the stand court challenges. Potter 21 Dem start with already delivered long overdue reforms like 17 whatever little change conservative to let the dream pass the Dems deploy legislature including clear constitutional reaction back up revision and progressive legislation back up revision involved extreme constitutional policies to achieve the goals towards that like the concept back of legislation or president makes the legal congress could take extreme steps of using backup provision or related policy number to course the courts and letting legislation stand climate ability to be back up with the CNC program caps and restricts a long week years to go to strategy now climb change cause extension spread 19 house source narratives renewable standards headed for another degree 55% of population of 20 days of legal condition and the threshold humans are able to north and west over with extreme weather extremes little wildfire to waves drought and inundation monsoons and rivers reduced by 30% more to 30% of the ecosystem collapse including coral system rainforest and arctic non-violent sunshine optics food production inadequate next Biden's pushing of the bipartisan infrastructure package now PCK to reconcile competing plans and move past disagreements will work for 16 bipartisan Biden first Biden second center bipartisan legislative management administration for super health and sober law said there's a new fact of straight from traditional waste agree and paying for the land the group will discuss it during historic investments planning coons speak with GOP rhetoric packages with Republicans representing counter proposals and cheaper suggesting a larger spending plan CDR is content to consume vintage PC and floor time cannibalizing in negotiation Hammett 20 and Biden said he's able to end capital Russian cards effective to push back being targeted to deliver announced CDR to need a partnership is going to Biden one of the most progressive criminal justice running candidate Biden facing current governments low the time and PC limited administration to priorities economic followed infrastructure is key to competitiveness extinction bar 20 prosperity by the workers to control work have to travel with that world action hold the workers jobs the U.S. risk undermine legitimacy international and the outcome determine security for years America needs a growth strategy infrastructure strength increasing of funds a strong military now so we're going to forge some prosperity through battle mobility increase the credibility toward the values and alliances setting the stage for decades American leadership and the strong recoveries go to ability to solve share geopolitical challenges positions strength address global crisis climate pandemics to refugees next up the United States federal should reduce via criminal penalties surveillance of United States persons by non-space foreign members of the United States Armed Forces domestic policing purposes unless expressly authorized the Constitution or Act of Congress so forcing law enforcement distinctions via criminal penalties space force law enforcement impossible PC exemption surveillance are key to effective USSF and Germany 20 PC export of the use of the air Army Air Force to execute laws in the United States DoD continues to hand over U.S. citizens have Congress which have legislative surveillance satellites and investigation reconnaissance to increase commercial space operation the advancement of tech USS need the flexibility enforce laws of his law enforcement engage private entity into sense of ability to base identity enforce regulation Congress have to pass new legislation granting law enforcement as over nations will the whole nation said to redefine between airspace and space a lot of better security granting law enforcement for the U.S. Ensure enforcement body space forces basic and world thus and enabling regulators and monitoring commercial protection of technology practices and laws to get ahead of data surveillance and local law enforcement agents surveillance debate using government satellite code and law enforcement for non-new agents would be able to request satellite imagery America's by agents and jurors would show the court will need to find imaging under consideration the war the government's intrusive and the values for tech size exposing going to be seen from space soon welcome private citizens imaging presumably real use as use law enforcement private the warning law enforcement cannot use tech and print the walls up on the well choose how the determine capable or need to draft legislation links space for the will uses law enforcement face colonization coming by 2087 the lack of clear governance damage progress sparks intergalactic conflict over 18 things directly there was happening between the armed become feasible there people and on Mars the Mars called the territories of US and China having the truth which world autonomy China and warships and Mars the present surgery with armed division there is no space colonization government called station people all governs and necessary rules increase probability good how it comes in inserted in the context of progress evolution with the collective government space colonization government knows it can never seem human history fail to create adequate government ways failing to colonize or a galaxy popularly writing extinction worse than extinction Boston 3 the rate of the laws of Buckles demand the loss of human lives are on super close to 10 to the 46 per century of delayed calls and we can get lower by counting stars and multiplying with computing environment potential 10 to the 20 lives were second and more conservative and not assume non-biological institution runs about a loss of 10 to the 14 their lives were second of delayed calls to exact numbers of we are huge even new conservative and potential 100 trillion potential beings lost every second of colonization go to the cyber advantage this advantage makes a negative one civilian scenario A the most proximate hurdle confusion about the red vectors is effective core military but the half increased restriction of the explanation of how news authority DHSB the Alexander and Johnson evidence does them no better and puts them in a double it either says NSA is already surveillance info sharing so they never traded off or learn limits so the PC is approximate cost to courts scenario GBN's evidence processing should be a crime Bush actions are all constitutional rules has nothing to do with the government and the courts and court inconsistently creates leniency when you see Alexander Wilson decision to authorize the conservative and corrupt is a major challenge concerns are slipping raised divider Americans we support some bureaucracies and duties emphasize recognizing limitations such as military as expert devising ways as law enforcement officials and maintains the government's level use of its authority to conduct about surveillance cyber capabilities and in the US agent local engaged in the software search for computers watching and finding one of them
Did she freeze for everyone? I stopped at 125 right now. Bella, you're back now, I think, right? Can you
Yeah,
speak?
I can hear on the call. It says my internet connection isn't stable. Hopefully it'll be fine, but I can turn off my camera to hopefully increase it. So 125, I mean, Nicole, cut me off right as I finish the re-highlighting of Alexander and what's called. Is that fine? To start off from? Sorry. Okay. 3, DOD, recutting above empirically disproves their evidence issues for hypotheticals worth pitting someone who isn't even DOD, no internal link. In McCarty 20, are the fears of cyber-terrorism, free exaggeration, cyber-text, critical terms, not being contacted by terrorists, group not that inflict damage to qualified terrorism, hundreds of differences, provide critical infrastructure failures, routine occurrence, cyber-terrorism, need to attack multiple targets simultaneously for long periods to create terror or achieve strategic goals, effective attacks, not likely scenario for terrorist groups, funding is an all-cost helping. What do I read next? Just one? Okay, the grid is resilient, unseemly. 17, the grid was built with reliable, strong safety culture, afforded a very defensible, cyber interconnected infrastructure. When the target away, you're talking for hours, the most weak disruption, not along the outages, compromising safe nuclear rights already over the side of considering the advantages to have or ROI is minimal. Do I read the next card? Okay, no Japan impact. The internal link is 7 lines. 1 random North Korean terrorists. 1 about modeling US 5 full of filler words, and none of them may cause or future descriptive arguments such as by the power tag. This is an argument. The next advantage, Seymour conflict, Neville Davidson 13 mutual frustrations, civil leadership villages 9 Union Obama to run up Racker and Steel Chatters military resistance Racker Henry Johnson Clinton's evident Lincoln restore reviving general rules of mutual frustration culture factors which are embedded. Mark card it embedded CMR's dead card 18 indications Trump would be bad for Seymour and insulted a prisoner as a warning signal. He would neither respect nor bring any adherence long-standing folk have used these signals failures shortly prophesied by CMR would be become to Trump has dreaded and norm after another the appointing military official blaming generally and politicking and politics and intel community to pulling Kelly tweeting uncoordinated orders. Mark carded orders.
Okay. Are you good for cross 6?
Yep.
Cool. Sorry, I extended my time to 8 minutes. Okay. Status of the off.
Status quo is always an option. That also means judge kick.
Okay. What are the net benefits? Or okay, actually, let me ask a different phrasing of that question. Any of the process counterplans have infrastructure as a net benefit?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. I can hear Caitlin.
Okay. The clearly Constitution counterplan. So the counterplan establishes a term limit on Supreme Court justices unless we do the plan.
Yep. Oh wait,
Not-
actually,
The
Not
opposite of
exactly.
that?
I can explain the mechanism exactly. It says we will not do the plan unless the Supreme Court unless the Supreme Court strikes down Congress setting term limits. I can explain the mechanism directly. The counterplan uses a clearly constitutional backup provision onto term limit legislation, which says that if legislation is struck down by the Supreme Court, Congress has to enact this other backup provision and then do it.
Okay, so wait, have you read a card that term limits are coming now?
No, we fiat it. We fiat legislation that creates term limits as well as sets up that legislation with the backup provision of the plan.
Okay, gotcha.
Wait. So the net benefit is precedented off of declaring term limits unconstitutional?
The net benefit is based off creating the clearly constitutional backup mechanism.
What? Okay, so what does that backup mechanism do?
It codifies a mechanism for Congress to put backup legislation into other legislation bills, like a backup if something's ruled unconstitutional, which can be used in the future. Like our evidence.
Okay, so what part of that backup legislation? What legislation is coming out in the future that means that backup legislation solves climate?
Nothing is happening right now with backup legislation. We just think that provision needs to happen so we can pass climate legislation in the future that overcomes Supreme Court challenges.
How is this competitive at all?
It competes off certainty and immediacy. We don't fiat that term limits are struck down. The plan only happens if Supreme Court decides to strike down term limits, which we've read evidence we think is likely to happen, but it's not certain.
So it attaches a rider to the implementation of the plan.
no.
The plan uncertainly rides something being struck down almost, I would phrase it as, if you're putting it in terms of a rider.
Okay. The Space Force pick, the middle of the card says Congress has to pass new legislation granting law enforcement powers. The counterplan text clearly does not do that. How does it solve the...
We'd say that the powers are coming in the future.
What? What
I
card
think
says
Nicole
that?
can answer this question better too.
Okay, if they're getting law enforcement powers in the future, why does that not solve the net benefit if they become law enforcement?
We think that our evidence is specific to the PCA being instrumental in them having this role. The solvency advocate is pretty specific that these law enforcement powers happen under the PCA, even though it is an armed force.
Okay, prep 10 minutes. Starting now. Wait, I'm gonna stop for a second. We're at 7:41. Tony's computer is like not functioning.
I accidentally clicked the option in verbatim to co-author, and now nothing. It's not letting me save this document nor exit Word. So
So we'll start 10 minutes of tech time now.
I've had to use tech time like 3 times this tournament because my computer like only stays on for 20 minutes without a charger and it likes to die in round.
Oh no.
I'm gonna try restarting Word. If not, I might restart my computer.
Peekoots, how have your rounds been?
Round 7 was stressful. Wait, the court injunction counterplan. We spent so long talking about that together. The cards worked.
Good.
The ones I sent you.
I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
Okay,
although,
it's working
okay.
now. Sweet.
Okay, wait. That's 9:10. I'll put that in the chat. Okay. So we had 7:41. Starting again. 5:31. I'll put that in the chat. And I will send it now. Okay, should be sent. Order is the cyber defense advantage, then the CMR advantage, then T subsets, then the court's counterplan, excuse me, then the Constitution thing counterplan, then the Space Force pick, then the infrastructure dised. Does anyone need that again? Cool. Can I get a thumbs up when people are good?
I still need to download it. Sorry.
All right.
We're both good.
Cool. Resolving PCA beginning to collaboration between civilians, the courts, and the DoD for self-cyber attacks and critical infrastructure and black start scenarios. This Alexander and Monarch can't self-escalation through preemptive attacks on retail this act and or leverage they dropped independently. The plan models Japan and France no co-hacks on nuclear plants which cause meltdowns, extinction, this diamond silicon. Their first argument, the plan causes oversight, which solves civilian trust in the military because all of the intelligence is now routed through civilian agencies because the military is no longer allowed to do policing. The second argument, no, it's afraid in the status quo because they're unsure of whether or not the PCA will be involved. The plan clarifies the PCA to allow them to be more confident about whether we're involved. The next argument of the court's internal link. This card is mainly our solvency advocate and a preempt to the version of the court's counterplan that you read. So I'll explain it down later. It's not necessary for solvency. Now the DoD thing, it doesn't disprove anything. They're thinking about the PCA when they make decisions. Which is the Johnson evidence. They say no internal link. Yes, spillover. A Russia already has inverse. The solar one's hack putting backdoors for all our central system. They only have to make the decision to flip the switch. That's Monarch B. No air gapping Stuxnet. Use hardware to infiltrate entirely aircraft facility, which causes malware. This works between systems. That's the act on evidence. Now, the modeling thing, yes, modeling. That's on new control other government the world asks for the same thing. Now, the CMR advantage. The CMR solves extinction crisis escalate with Iran, Russia, and China, and destroys response to climate change, pandemics, and cyber war. That's goal be clear and hard. Well, they three interlinks to solvency. One, recklessness, military monopolization of intel loss for mission creep, which creates reckless decisions. That's not only civilian intel filtering solves. That sleep means the transition periods where the countries are testing U.S. effective CMR prevents unnecessary escalation. That's goal being clear, which answers their first argument because there were contentious presidential transitions then, but there are now, which is the escalation claim. Now the second argument, CMR dead under actually. The overstretched internal link military focus on local law enforcement stresses them to then prevents crisis response, causes nuclear meltdowns, domestic foreign terrorism, and pandemics. That's the Springer evidence. Now, the second argument they made, A, is priced in a 2021 reset is necessary to resolve the problems Trump created. That's lead. B, doesn't that presidential transitions are a unique stressor which cause escalation. That's goal B and clear. Now, T subsets. We reform the entire system by changing its size. Counter-Trump in is within this color 50 the word means that within the subset the word does not mean that we are not for any 31st crimes such as the word answers their CGR definition, but substantial reform should focus on particular crimes that came to identify instances of penalties determined with the important groundwork and prefer 1 grammar. The rest says in policing, which implies action taken inside the broader category. 2, precision. No intent to find or exclude. 3, off-ground. They limit the topic to 3 apps, which have no offense to states or courts. Don't have potential abuse because functional limits and enact check and condo is bad because strangers are going to punish bad when it sees the word smart. 2 ECs, which causes increased research. Voter for deterrence. Dispo solves the court's counterplan. Perm. Do counterplan. Perm. Do the F as enforcement mechanism for the court order. Solves the Congress had judicial cover to act. Agent counterplans are voting. She still want to see moots or form good bad debate. Doesn't solve one consistency. Courts create pattern enforcement. Each is ambiguous, creating differing standards for different jurisdictions. Duty in the private sector respond by behaving conservatively and not cooperating. That's Alexander transfer. Only solves the civilians internal link, which is not what our solvency deficit is about. 2, no remedy. Courts can invent new criminal penalties. Only exclude evidence cuts thrown prosecutions to trigger the advantage. This is Alexander. But even if they do read, they don't read criminal penalties in the PCA. That doesn't apply. 3, prosecutor deferences. Mayor 18 courts exhibit regular caption law enforcement difference opinion about from prosecutor from the statement criminal surveillance litigation feeding through this without a solvency advocates. A very distorts the place now real world discourse called research. And even if delay is fatal, the military doesn't perceive durable field, which means in the interim the military will be unsure and self-deter destroys cyber response. That's been risen and The exclusionary rule part of the account plan criminal penalties are key. The exclusionary rule does not punish the military, so they have zero incentive to follow the PCA. That's the Walsh evidence. The Constitution account plan you can cross-apply the solvency deficits from courts, but I'll do a little bit of extrapolating here. The certainty deficit definitely applies since a new mechanism that hasn't been used before. The DoD will definitely self-deter in response because they're unsure of whether unsure of whether or not the F is a good idea. Perm D the account plan A resolved to consult May what's never resolved consult B should is conditional in Carter 5 express condition given the catapults of the catapults of the entire app are illegitimate and impossible to generate deficits against, and they pose a new barrier to inherency, which is impossible to research. No internal spillover. There's no evidence that the Dems will use this to solve climate, only that they could. And perp to the plan the catapult on another issue. Limited insurance is good when net benefits aren't germane to the F. They have to read a unique link. There's no impact warming this far course. That is likely level of warming unlikely times limit the humidity able to avoid extreme serious probability of 6 degrees this time 10% 10 degrees 3% is the hard line so unlikely to take action long before 10 degrees the pick perm deboth perm catapults need to be textually and functionally competitive. They just carpets make the catapult unenforceable. This Hayman's certificate for our even more powerful courts have been reluctant to test the powerful levels declared the legislature expression means preventing protection contain exploitable exceptions and law enforcement. The part of the card that says law enforcement that Congress will pass exceptions in the future for the Space Force also means the act can solve the counterplan because of unless authorized by the Constitution or an act of Congress. Those future laws that would justify Space Force policing means they would still do it for the F. Perm to the counterplan advocate only says perm to counterplan only says applies to our Navy, Army, Air Force, and Marines. It should be based for competition since most predictable for pre-run prep space. Getting law enforcement powers solves the internal, which I already talked about. Space Force is ineffective this far. Farley Space Force budget will be much lack of specific Air Force will need to leave a figurative or an ability to commit the bureaucratic resources in direct and institution common with little in terms of bureaucratic and procurement distinction figurative and interservice conflict and competition. Space Force Department support organization no agreed upon the structure to the personal costs occupied a small part for maintaining its research and a strong relation to Congress space will struggle to protect the size of the budget creating space for the end of political and relaxed resources political have those little citizens will grow beyond any time soon. Now the politics they said Tony write perms and get cards. The politics they said numbers defend the police Afghanistan political control any run sanctions no link that's hearing attracted speeches about this issue is way to relevant voters and security nations. Biden doesn't push the plan savage 20 in the patriot but I've been claimed the laws on but I've been lament the removal of sanctions would have given the police more powers of surveillance, but the tech lobby does this force these out I've been better to devote to the debate they hope to prevail against powerful figures footsteps in years ago. Today's advocates for surveillance form can new influence allies not get into 20 letters check how my countries on to chance of lawmaking evidence to my pattern this matter to myself such a difference I see data standing west mother doesn't problem such as my fears for windows went on infrastructure this elving 410 dude go big now because only how does not the time shy when the by per coalition even make you less come to them side just are never showing interest in showing progressive opportunity over the they can't delay national party to purpose if a few votes could be further for this was some things people appreciate even elected officials don't want to say speaks he gets Steve if you don't listen to build more infrastructure but lessons from FDR and LBJ won't pass this Pindle. For the table to reconciliation zero reference on progressive still it's a big product that cannot protect and creates often to die under committee for dominant play of dead dems against the hard and interest of fully even faster life support from the from ever reaching for particular when other parties that can control police from has to take up and even if it's watered down to the point where they can't solve their but let's sell for 11 infrastructure has to for the hearing up for federal fossil subs corporate other aspects but we never organize nor like gender enough for even though it's still complex fit over amount with losing progress with limited subsidies loopholes and tax with benefits also cut us off and essential to progress on climate change. Okay. The Congress kind of plan. Permutation did the plan establish the term limits are unconstitutional. Would give them the idea for the thing because their solvency evidence talks about term limits as the internal link to creating those whatever they're called, the constitutional things, which means that if they see those, then they'll be more likely to use them in the future.
Open and cross-ex?
Yeah.
First, the last perm, it's just perm and do term limits unconstitutional, right?
Yeah.
Does he use the mechanism of the counterplan?
Probably not.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about the infrastructure dissed.
I lost the 2AC, my bad. The Geller evidence or Geller evidence, who doesn't perceive the plan?
Probably the public. Well, so lawmakers don't think the public perceives the plan, which means lawmakers don't try and like appeal to the public on those things. They don't deliver speeches about those, et cetera, et cetera.
Why does it
which-
matter what the public thinks?
Because all of your links are about public perception of CJR.
Okay. The next card, actually, Tech Lobby does. Why do they push it if nobody perceives it? The card's Geller is pretty
Yeah.
sweeping.
So obviously the tech lobby card is tech lobby is distinct from public writ large because the tech lobby has specific interests with regards to the plan. It talks about the world's largest tech companies launch intensive lobbying efforts to create surveillance reform. It says that they'll push for moderate Democrats, more than a dozen Republican senators, et cetera, et cetera.
The card's about Section 702 reform. Why is that the plan?
Yeah, so Section 702 reform had like very similar portions about domestic surveillance, things like military involvement, et cetera, et cetera. So we would argue that those same people who are interested in Section 702 reform would be interested in the plan.
Cool. Let's go to actually theoretical reasons to reject the team first.
Condo agent counterplans, fiating illegal things without solvency advocates, counterplans that result in the AF, and that might be it.
Okay, condo agent fiat illegal counterplans result. That's it, right?
Yeah.
Sure. Let's go to the court's counterplan, the criminal penalties key stuff. Why?
So the Walsh evidence is very good on this. It says that the exclusionary rule, it prevents evidence from being used in court, right? But the military has no interest in like getting these people in jail or not. So it doesn't actually punish the military for anything because they're kind of like, well, this is a law enforcement thing. We don't really care. So they just keep on doing violations of the PCA because they use evidence for their own purposes and not for like domestic law enforcement purposes, which means that all the evidence that is excluded doesn't actually impact the military and only criminal penalties would punish the military.
Makes sense. The space pick. Why does it matter? Carve-outs, what's the impact?
Okay, so it says that courts, because like there isn't clarity on like whether let me find it. Yeah, because they provide protection containing exploitable exceptions, it means that more and more people in the military would use these exceptions in order to try and
How
get
do they
around,
use the
like,
exception?
how
How
do
are they in
use
the Space
that
Force?
exception?
Yeah.
I mean, there are probably plenty of ways they could do it. The military could like, I was gonna say go to space, but that sounds kind of silly. But like they'd use like legal tricks to exploit that.
Okay. 10 minutes prep starting now. Stopping prep 8:02. I'll put that in the chat. Nicole's sending it out. While Nicole's sending it out and doing that, I'm just gonna refill my water bottle.
It should have been sent. I'm just gonna set up while everybody gets it. Is everybody good for an order? I'm just gonna give it then. The clearly constitutional counterplan, the PIC, the court's counterplan, T, cyber advantage, CMR advantage.
One more time, please.
Clearly constitutional counterplan, PIC, court's counterplan, T, it's just condo on there, cyber advantage, CMR advantage. If nobody stops me or signals to me that they're not ready in the next 10 seconds, I'm just gonna shut them. Cool. The counterplan solves the entirety of first if yes, the term limits are created by Congress, but with a backup provision to do the F. But that's seen as unconstitutional by the court, which means it strikes down. It establishes the backup provision, which must be done if it gets strikes down. They've conceded this portion. Strike down by conservative Supreme Court means the F is passed. It's a precedent. Clearly constitutional backup provision legislation that spurs climate legislation. Democrats durably passed the Supreme Court. That's it. Markham and Potter evidence prefers sufficient solves the yes no question. The counterplan solves enough to turn less solves the deficit have no articulate impact. The sad ways if the counterplan does the self kicking for me, counter proves the focus of finding the best policy option. Because the first argument here, don't give them solvency deficit if they have an F specifically cross apply them. I shouldn't have to answer them. The uncertainty deficit doesn't apply even there's uncertainty beginning durable. If means the counterplan is durably enacted, which means the plan happens and Congress passes legislation. That's the same internal and the affirmative, which means the DHS will have to follow. And there's no uncertainty in the future. No permanent both images. So if it doesn't solve the net benefit, the plan happens first. Rejects any leverage or backup provision. Whatever Congress want to enact the same legislation twice. It's a moot issue that this is set a precedent for using backups alternative legislation that the Supreme Court. That's a Badara. If it's only infected by simple provisions, also can build 20 codes that a provision statute measure of one part of a legislation structure would be beyond the part investigated by simple past the constitution for provision fallback measure that's leaning constitutional publicity and advertising court could pass a measure requiring freedom limits for justice and coupled with a fallback provision of limited justice discretion over case to your Democratic legislative agenda. It's chock full of new policy programs. Democrats have armored to give more possible measure. Mootness this the court would not have jurisdiction to the back provision because would not be a live controversy show and 14 courts only have subject matter jurisdiction live controversy when a case becomes so. The first step is a dismissal of the court of assessing parties vacating judgment or deferring of a judgment or review because mootness for spending legal consequences have followed the guidance. The court ordered vacate and they became the more on appeal by absence or settlement unilateral action. Next argument here is perm to the counterplan. No, it severs first actually authorizing for the plan text the most subject standard competition. Second functionally a substantial words of phases for substantial meaning real present time. C B should is certain summers 94 context made construction should more than desirable should mean unless the notes laws immediately affect us in the future and managed and yet on weight of authority appears to be a part of obligation his conveys a sense of obligation would not be much synonymous with the word must see resolved is certain OED 89 free from down to 30 and applies immediate random house 6 or resolve the computer in this decision. Our definition of best a ground to perform skate every dis politics federals move until dependent action B limits close and every written tons of new mechanism predictable advantage recommendation court opinions or consultation SAF conduct discern predictable advocacy change neck can servants of what makes the of moving target less spike out of office. The next argument here counter interpretation process counter solvency advocate argued even if they result in that preferred a first neck ground influx seeming losing key position this or neck topics huge F as a world choosing no topic as they seek first and last second real world education comparing process is a relevant consideration policymakers third graph ground they get a third defense process add-ons based on that first one you see writing fourth lit checks ensures ground checks and progression fifth reject the argument not the team punishment fifth crimes other the next argument here is no speller yes evidence indicates about it says that if Congress would enact exact provision now is key. It would codify the mechanism in the future, which means they would have legislation and a path to follow in the future. The next argument, per other issues, intrinsic that's path. First, net ground allows you have to attack on anything solved net benefits. They could say perm to the and solve care. Second, limits allows unlimited half by adding anything. Third, arbitrary no what is limited is the yes, no question whether intrinsic. Fourth, when the accountable is theoretically legitimate. Reject the perm. It excludes the accountable, and then do the impact work. Perms have to be accountable ones have to be textually or functionally competitive. The accountable ones functionally competitive. Only look at textual competition for this perm is bad. And first, it's not in the literature, which means you can't predict the different perms will do it. Second, it justifies scramble permutation, ban the one permutation, which strike out of all net ground, which means can't predict the impact of climate change, cause extinction. Now, keep waiting ensures we hit reversal tipping points, causes civilization collapse, lethal temperature extreme weather, acidification, ecosystem collapse, decrease food supply. That's a spread. Evidence defense is wrong. 19, climate change causes extinction due to unrelated faction on liberty because getting effects we don't multiple effective to break what's many avenues positive replacement of ice from melting, increase observation, salinity, warming, during force, increase fires and breeze more carbon, adaptability, limited climate change to heat stress, even a modest warming express direction of the world under heat stress, area of land, medium and uninhabitable dwarf sea level, making extinction like probably 5%, even 0.5% of the warming and extinction aren't present. And the last perm here, it definitely doesn't solve the net benefit, only enacts term limits, but doesn't create backup provisions that would actually codify legislation being happened in the future. It's only not a question of creating term limits, we're creating backup provisions within term limits, which Caitlin did at Fiat. She only did perm limits. That was cross-clarification of the pick. Space colonization is coming, and the armed U.S. Space Force is equipping itself law enforcement capabilities, including surveillance, domestic purposes. It's a part of the Air Force. The conduct of the USS would be criminalized by the AF, which is disabled the conduct of space for the counterbalance picks out the Space Force itself. They have avoids criminalization. The net benefit always single shop. The plan would criminalize the Space Force, makes the future of space colonization lawless, causes slow development space conflict, which kills one territory of decillion people every second across the West sufficiency frame. And Judge Cake, it applies here. No permanent both. It definitely moots the internal net benefit because it creates a standard that all parts of armed forces, including the Space Force, which is in the armed forces, would not be able to act anything else is severance. I did the work on the other accountable, no permanent accountable and severance sexually functionally one functionality. The plan immediately bars the military surveillance acts and force the criminal penalties. I'll be explicit here. That means that blind chills anyone who commits military surveillance, which the USS already does this satellite image. That's a German for a good measure. Cost by the definition from the other accountable. And 2 textually bars defendant complete and prior refusal. Macmillan no date officially say something must not happen in refuse. Permission 3 authorization has given a post facto can't be in the initial text. Merriam Webster no date to give official legal power. 4 permutation supposed to be textually functionally competitive. I also did that work on the other accountable. And 5 our definition of 8 precision comes from central dictionary cited court case based on non-resolutional plan warning, which only sees the competition B debatability permits debates on implementation of plan is per the 1AC, which is prerogative of the defendant. The next argument here is can't carve an exception. First, the app has an exception. It says unless Constitution or Congress permits it. So what is the distinction here? They haven't explained it. Don't give it to them. Second, if he solves it, permanently bars other parts of the that are not the Space Force from not being able to do surveillance within the United States, which means durable fiat still upholds. It means there's no uncertainty. The exception thing doesn't make sense. Our solvency advocate in the 1AC indicates that the Space Force is getting law enforcement powers right now, but not a specific exception will be written in by Congress, which means this doesn't move it. Second, it says it's uncertainly going to happen, which means only the capital, because a durable change is it's only the certain action of solving. The next permutation over here, it says, what? I cannot read my flow. That's a problem. Let me check what the 2 weeks. Oh, wait, this is just perm to the accountable again. I already answered the above. They say getting the power inevitably. I already did the above. And the next argument here is Space Force fails. No, it doesn't. Germany 20, the determination with their society reduce surveillance, not division, law to act on anticipation technology, be ready to be republic, and law enforcement authors use as surveillance. Satellites are key law 18 spaces ultimately high ground. It provides the best vantage point surveillance activity, also facility navigation, targeting, command and control of use, multi learn heavily on space and force multiplying to get a critical component of war, finding capabilities, destruction, so fight operation, become indispensable, vulnerabilities, not escape potential competitors such as China, Russia, the multi focus and defenses with the USS view space rank warfare. You mean now the first crime committed space, exceptionally woefully inadequate criminal law space courses, key news 19 assets, vice criminal common spaces, raise the question how to handle criminal activity space, there's a framework, criminal disputes in spaces, social rights, weapons, and more active space. We're going to look at criminal jurisdiction framework based on sovereign activities don't make sense. IG could be a good model for the human community. Earth is hundreds of years away, and it's now we have the opportunity to promote peace. On to the courts, kind of a conceded test of competition. The theory is a reason to reject the argument that team T, a condo is actually going to be in the 1 and R. The cyber advantage, it definitely doesn't solve no collapse. McCrory evidence indicate that they happen frequently, but the infrastructure bounces back from harm. No one wants to take it down. Has motive. Grid collapse doesn't have a text. Is definitely proof goodness and peace will be minimal, but there's no cyber collapse disruption if you're good because even a cyber text, okay, there's redundancy with the system, totalized shutdown, 0-day vulnerabilities can't be permanent system patches, so any enforcement loss is relevant. That's a done. Doesn't evident Russia having inroads doesn't apply because not inroads can collapse the entire system. Pass the text for the Japan scenario is very silly. Crossix was really bad. They had to promise new evidence because it doesn't say Japan will model future changes the government actually wants to do. There's political pressure, or they actually look in the US. The card in the 2AC is also really bad. It doesn't talk about Japan and is really vague. And no cyber war or retail Kelly, she wrote a 19 Doomsday article about the cyber world, where 3 is exaggerating the media, political, finance, and political system. Low-level cyber is not because of conflict or run military massive cyber violence immune. This type of states have been shown to receive the threat is overstated network nation appear given the vulnerability cyber will never estimate. On to the CMR advantage. CMR said Trump amplifies structural trends. 1 military appointment, Trump accelerating jobs military. 2 politicization. Trump has encouraged troops to vote for him. 1 parroting the military political prop. 3 line trying the military speak size of shells full. Each of service chiefs open up for the president. That's Carter performing senior fellow at the Center for New American Security Peace and the impact of politically discipline. That's the Davidson evidence fights have been happening since Obama with Iraq, Kennedy, Johnson, Clinton, even Lincoln never actually escalated or had an impact. There's no reset. They haven't given a warrant why the future will be different. Cancel CMR. Oh, they're all caused of COVID-19. If there were causes when simply whose service would be easy, not so further. So I just said proper restoring the balance runs fundamental ingenuity. Proc Americans do not trust institutions because they're so dysfunctional. With those dysfunctional because Americans do not trust some situation. Americans lack confidence. Just about their solution lies within education for a smaller percentage. Will serve outsourcing foreign policy help procedure. CMR Shake 17. The admin non-American managing the multi-dependent was to where we're now seeing as a wholesale application. Any responsibility exercise oversight of whatsoever something is important in nation calls and send members receive response to synchronizing national review. Just say let the multi handle it. Mark the card to handle it. I'm going to take a second to prep. Let me just check how much I have. 802. Starting now. $7:30, stopping now. I'm just putting it in the chat, sorry. All right, open to cross-ex.
Cool. All right. So I want to start on the Constitution counterplan thing. So the counterplan says, or this Huckenbiller evidence that you read, a poison pill ties the constitutionally vulnerable provision to a fallback measure that is plainly constitutional but politically unappetizing. How is that the AF?
Oh, well, this is just descriptive of what can happen under a clearly constitutional provision. Our evidence descriptive writ large of a clearly constitutional backup provision is just when you slap back on legislation onto a different bill. It also, our 1NC advocate gives different examples. It can be something related, i.e. if you pass a really radical climate legislation, it could be a smaller version of it. It could be something totally different. It could be something popular to try to encourage doing the second thing. It could be something unpopular. Like you're just cherry picking lines about what it looks like. We think our evidence is pretty specific on what a constitutional backup provision is.
So what the counterplan does, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it has Congress and the president, whatever, impose term limits on justices. Then it says that if those term limits are unconstitutional, it does the plan?
Yes, because it establishes a backup provision within the first piece of legislation that enacts the plan if it's struck down by the Supreme Court.
Right. Okay. So then I guess my question about perm de both, this mootness it said, because they're inherently connected, obviously the first part of the counterplan is not moot because it has not been ruled on or done anything. So why couldn't that still be rendered unconstitutional?
This is the mootness they said is a question of if there is a controversy over a backup provision being actually effective. We think that if perm de both happens, what?
Where does it say that?
We think this impacts out what lack of a controversy looks like, but the analytic.
Yeah, but there's definitely a controversy over term limits.
Well, we think the issue, the core controversy of the counterplan is not over term limits, but whether a clearly constitutional provision within legislation should be allowed. This process is not being used right now. We think if the plan happens at first and then it doesn't allow for leverage in the future with a clearly constitutional provision of the plan, we think that there is no precedent for using that kind of legislation and backup provision because the courts don't see it as leverage in the term limit.
The courts don't see it as leverage. So wait, but why wouldn't the courts just strike down term limits anyway? Because that's what all of your evidence says. It just says they'll strike down term limits in the abstract.
We think they'll maybe strike down term limits, but they won't strike down term limits under the pretense of a clearly constitutional backup provision, which is what the internal link is premised off.
Mechanism for solvency? If it doesn't strike it down, then it doesn't solve the F.
It is the mechanisms for solvency, but the second part of the first plank is the mechanism for the internal link. Just because
you have to strike it down in order to solve the F, right?
Yes.
But you just said they don't strike it down.
No, we think we think that the court will strike down the first part, which is term limits are unconstitutional. The controversy is whether the second part of legislation can also stand. We think that is not perceived as leverage by the courts onto the term limits part if the plan has already been enacted. It's a question if courts perceive this backup legislation happening and whether the Congress will have precedent for using this backup legislation in the future. She's sending it.
The one in ours has been sent. I'll give everybody a second to get it. Has everybody gotten it? Cool. Wait, it's the disad. What's above the disad? Wait, sorry, Nicole, which flows? It's T, then the disad. We get 3 condos, good 1 argument of visual content, identifies reason moving the region areas, 2 is strategy conscious think wheeling deal with overwhelming amounts of forces, best critical thinking, the skills through strategic 2 is choice 3 negative ideological flex condition, lots of negative text multiple interforce 1 is defense accord improves line writing force cues and algorithms is at T speed 5 year negative a large topic no topic descent infinite prep 2 air persuasion control levels the blame fuel stick 6 stick us with the counter 1 self skew and deterrent 7 potential abuses in the voter it's infinitely aggressive 8 display feels it's ad hoc a condo and disguise and encourages sandbagging best artists 2 is add-ons the disad competitors prevents persuading leadership to turn threats strengths lines of guides crisis cooperation states and military power otherwise the revision of powers escalates as a bird evidence turns against one cyber attacks all more likely when the use looks to revision of powers think it's their time to pass staff doesn't solve because they have a much better tech to competitors so they can overcome defensive to military and civilians dysfunctional either way because they look weak but their terminal impacts like original states becomes inevitable the first argument no evidence has thumpers creed lasting for Biden's PC on them these are encouraged warns make them read evidence that it reaches the Senate we get new answers things like defund or no bill and things like sanctions and bills our executive action, no thumping for at all. The 413, Biden said, well, negotiate over the first legislature, White House, Biden went to Biden and law maker parts of first capital or gun reform. Is it going to happen? Miller and Java, 416, Biden's agenda running against the realities of the narrow Democratic majority in the Senate will tackle multiple legislation with the White House focusing on infrastructure to dominate commercially held over to control the police reform, take back legislation heights in 14, debate of that will be delayed long can be sufficient to influence the message in the process. The labor is time consuming time of bill is limited every day devoted to one. Is denied for the other legislation threat of filibuster and provide leverage. The next argument, it's a question of link debate. Congress will pay attention, and so will Biden. That's all that matters. Not the public. It's not about the plan, but encryption writ large will when that is perceived below. The next argument, okay, we agree. Biden fights the plan price. 2, Biden strongly endorsed giving soldiers the power to West American civil. Biden beset the PC, which prevents military exerting and police sector in the country should be re-examined. Has to be amended. Biden called that in 95 to introduce legislation will audit the PC enabling military incidents involving weapons of mass destruction. That perceived loss saps the president PC and derails the general Loomis 7. The perception matters for repetitions within most available resources. Chief executive have the belief that all of occupants are waiting without the ability when enterprise can lead to decision individual on scale on the winning side and negotiate accordingly. Lose failure begins a failure. President is bringing declining political habits, mission capacity, defense goal to establish perceived decreasing commander time to the president. Any presidential veto would have to be overridden by fiat to guarantee passage of the plan. This would destroy PC. /6 7. The president will not be able to be without governance or rights or politically damaged towards, and he will not only face lose but lose PC. He confronts himself to defend future interactions with Congress. The next argument the land trades often takes Biden political capital because it causes fights within Congress. It is uniquely contentious rights of partisanship. That's the land is perceived as a racial injustice reform of surveillance, which people hate. That's the Hammond's evidence card about the tech lobbies, not about the plan. It doesn't say it gets to full passage or actually increase the PC, just that the tech lobby solves it, but not even about the plan specifically. But we'll bring specific evidence that certain lawmakers once I not mentioned supports police surveillance, office in 2019 demonstrated back in October, and Trump mentioned has to official Trump with the law and legislative representative 1,000% sure for the security of an issue mentioned what in line with Trump's position in cases he broke with the party line supports surveillance nation along with other moderate Dems and will 20 he signed up there is no message advance report of the amendments. One of their amendments would have got the words of obtained warrant access to users search to the rising information 10 Dems would against her carpet Casey Feinstein Heisen and Shaheen warned in the White House any legislation in heavens infrastructure passed the legislative fatigue program for the reason they're trying to slug an infrastructure political times of future Dems can only pass over the state of them and will be held to the legislative with London and is the new flood to be siege or the Bob New President Leland out of again the one or two made by the return to like start getting special and spending money might be willing to do the second one catches up with them and another White House Galliani team White House leader to double and spying authority on texting mill investor members report the act including Paul Ryan and civil White House watered and they regard the government to get a warning the search info Republican Democrats I see in the White House love unrestricted surveillance Galliani Democrats and Republicans into a lot of mess warrantless that was spying intelligence agency the White House the Senate Bush the rebel the worst in current law Senate passed without the next argument and no winners when capital is perceived as funded linkage to practice share 11 restore reveals turn the law because reports closing game to view these course report essential effect evidence residents suffer the declining PC part of the authority problem PC is real it's started 18 the resource a lot of the Congress not everybody's need to write resistance like issues over the root because the sequence how much PC spend and the rocket article and under the lines against the White House not that defined party risk got lost in numerous battle laws shock and over addressing many issues possibly the overkill in case the next term infrastructure passing out by pursuing bipartisan negotiating reparations corruption and funding side multiple Mr. Pastor to being floated but disagreeing iron thoughts of bloomer fame issue Biden PC will overcome any GOP moderate concerns it's working right now that's how much GOP opposition doesn't matter room for their team the Senate Dems to signal they have a choice of vice president of the infrastructure Schumer said Dems remain committed to addressing infrastructure Republicans supported with Schumer acknowledged Dems have reconciliation after Dems support is ready to reply and very hopeful PC overcomes LS47 the choice between raising technical look at each other likely have a less robust but it's still putting billions in infrastructure levels in your buildings but $1 trillion packet right instead of plan which change and work the requirements we open to negotiation the last argument the thumpers was it above the only infrastructure last argument it's a question of uniqueness the debate won't be watered down they consider internal link it solves it there's no reason it'll get watered down because it's the core issue.
We have 5:31 starting now. Stop prep 2. Okay, I'm gonna send out one. Let me save this document. Okay. Cards are sent. Okay, the order is going to be the cyber advantage, the CMR advantage, the progressive policy counterplan, the Space Force pick, then the infrastructure disadvantage. Okay. Is anyone not good? Cool. PC ambiguity prevents effective response to cyber attacks, conflict escalation, and grid collapse. Both are existential amount of evidence independently. The plan is modeled through Japan, where Svensko attacks on nuclear power, which cause meltdowns, which cause extinction. That's it. Independently dropped impacts. This is Slocum evidence. The first argument was that Texas disproves. Texas was obviously not a cyber attack, which doesn't disprove redundancy. It doesn't assume interconnectivity and malware spread. Malware is designed to be destructive, which means it's only a question of the capacity, which we're decisively ahead on. It's empirically proven by the SolarWinds attack, where they gained access to our intel, and the Russia attacked Ukraine and took out the entire grid for a month, which is a piece to act on. And the other piece of evidence, the yes spill over to Japan. We've read new evidence. The TOC evidence is it's pretty good. This is that other countries are willing to model, even if it's not. Doesn't specifically name drop Japan. The 1AC evidence proves that Japanese constitutional scholars are thinking about it, which means it's likely Japan will replicate. Yes, cyber impact. The piece of evidence they read in the 2NC it's not about nation states, and it doesn't speak to the capacity nor intent, which was isolated above the CMAR, or doesn't assume miscalculation nor people violating red lines, because non-state actors will make it appear as if U.S. were in a conflict with Russia or other actors, even if nation states have violated those red lines. Go to the CMAR advantage. CMAR solves extinction transitional crises, will escalate with Iran, North Russia, and China. That's clear evidence, and causes military overstretch, destroying threat response to inevitable crises like failed states, climate change, and that's the horrible evidence. The Carter evidence they extended obviously only assumes the Trump administration, but doesn't make a definitive bring claim. But we reverse causally solve all the warrants why CMAR is low now. The warrants for that is because the lack of civilian oversight, because the military is encroaching in other areas, i.e. Trump administration's been depleting the civilian role within the military, which the plan reverse causally solves by restoring civilian oversight. But even then, the military overstretch and is completely insulated from the rest of their defense. The next argument and empirics is not a full argument. Our evidence is predictive. It doesn't about future problems. Doesn't see the military overreach internal link, even if they don't access the broader internal link. All causes we reverse causally solve the structural factor by destroying the oversight by civilian agencies, which answers the card about the structure stuff. They didn't read enough of the second card to it to be a full argument. Go to the progressive counterpoint. Permutation do both. Mootness doesn't apply. Courts will still rule on the term limits part, because all their evidence just says the courts hate term limits, but it still solves the internal. All their evidence just says that including provision brings back congressional knowledge and momentum, means still provides awareness to mechanism which solves the internal. Permutation to the plan and the counterpoint other issue. If this counterpoint is legitimate, then I don't know if this counterpoint is legitimate. Then every counterpoint is legitimate. Limited intrinsicness is good. Key to test the germaneness and the benefit to the plan, which solves infinite regression of process counterpoint to steal the AF, and key to testing actual opportunity cost, which internal link turns their best policy option and logic offense on theory. Otherwise justifies an independent counterpoint to do something extraneous to garner artificial offense. Reading an actual disadvantage to the affirmative and a counterpoint that solves a disadvantage would solve all their offense. Our interpretation does not justify tricky perms against advantage counterpoints and picks check against using words like ban in the plan text. There's a bright line for limited intrinsicness. This is worse only functionally intrinsic is with no scramble permutation. Does not justify functional and textual intrinsic. You can't read perm planks to escape disadvantages. Theory is not a justification. Just because a counterpoint exists within the literature doesn't mean they have a God-given right to. Functional textual competition is good. It's most predictable since the plan text is the only stable locus for competition and derivation of ground. All pre-round preparation depends on the plan text, which makes it vital for research. Functional competition is arbitrary and subject to affinite conditionality, which shifts the goalpost. But ban the plan is not uncompetitive. Reword the counterpoint text you can pick out of enact and ban a criminal justice reform. Go to the Space Force pick. Necessary framing with the F versus the counterpoint. Just kick us back as excuse to 2ER means we have to inevitably debate two different worlds. It can't solve. First, CMR. It pisses off the military by carving exceptions to me, which is a piece of 2AC evidence and hurts civilian oversight because people don't trust it as credible. Second, circumvention. The military is desperate for surveillance, which means and the public does not perceive the difference between space source surveillance and surveillance by the NSA, which means they don't trust the military anymore, which decks the solvency for both advantages because it says that it results in Congress rehauling the whole intel structure as per the second advantage, and it means they aren't unwilling to share information as per the first advantage because no one knows the difference between surveillance done by the Space Force and other agencies, most people in the military, which claim they're doing surveillance for Space Force related reasons. They also just dropped the ball on the Space Force fails card that's really good. It says that there's zero funding for the Space Force and they lost all their funding to the Air Force. It's politicized. There's no information about how to actually properly govern space because there's no veterans. It's literally Trump's baby and there's no evidence that Biden's actually going to extend it, and none of their 2NC cards actually speak to the capacity of the Space Force broadly. Even then, their card indicates that they need to give Space Force the ability to deputize Space Force and give them law enforcement authority, which the counterpoint text does not do. Their only argument is that it's inevitable in the long term. If that is true, then the plan would not bar it because it would be a law enforcement agency and not a military agency, not go to the infrastructure disadvantage. No tourist case, no carded explanation why competitiveness implicates other parts of the app depends on them winning. Or so this said, the link debate proper group. Most of the link evidence is is not about military surveillance, rather police surveillance, which are evidence indicate is different from the plan. Price evidence about PC over soldiers arresting people, and the plan is not a racial justice reform. The tech lobby endorses it. Now the uniqueness debate proper. Most of the evidence is speculation, but it won't pass now. First, assault, the Promic 415, pressure repeal, assault, preference on high-tech states. Alarm breaks both parties opposed to change it to push to infrastructure. Democrats opposition to be jeopardized faster time. Everybody's in the place. Funding and Trump approval. Watson 416. If you're building difficult to pass some funding disputes, President's likely to get infrastructure means more paying for. We need public commitment from Trump that very difficult to get to. So the president's capitalist deal can be made as $1 trillion question. Manchin give it thumbs down. So O'Donnell 4 or 5 mentions to give infrastructure thumbs down to raise the corporate tax rate. It's just too high. It was alone. There's 7 other Democrats. Or the card is 7 other Democrats. Or oh wait, that was a full card. Never mind.
Let me just check how much time we had. 7:30 beginning now. Tony, it was the first 2 cards under the uniqueness header, right?
No, I skipped down to the salt card.
Oh, sorry, just wanted to check. Thank you.
Yeah, 1, 2 it was 3, 4, 5.
Okay. 2 an hour. I'm just gonna send out a card. I'm just putting it in a doc, sorry. Didn't want to put it in the chain. All right, should have been sent. The order is going to be the DISAD, the PIC, the constitutional counterplan, CMR, cyber advantage, then CMR advantage. Thank you, Bella. Oh, did this attach? Okay, never mind. My doc did not attach apparently. Hold up. I just saw that in the email chain. I'm just going to try that again. Okay, I believe an actual email should have been sent out now. Sorry about that. It was pick on top. Can someone like verbally tell me if they need more time for the cards or something? Okay, cool. Competitiveness prevents extinction prosperity. It leads to deterrence and threats. Strengthens alliances. It leads to cooperation. Otherwise, revision of power will escalate cost as a burden evidence. Even conceded all returns case words, even if it's on card, it doesn't mean Tony doesn't have to answer first. Even concede the use will look weak side. It looks like we're not supporting, which means that more attacks are going to happen because attackers and rogue states are want to get us right now. Second, revision states are more likely to escalate, which acts as all the impacts on the second advantage because the states will see the U.S. as weak and want to undermine competitiveness. Also means the military and civilian will be dysfunctional without funding, without actual prosperity happening right now. The link to be proper. They've conceded PC is key and find that that's a share and steward evidence, which means you have a high threshold for passing more legislation. Legislative fatigue will happen no matter what legislation passes bipartisan or not, because lawmakers will not have the resources to happen in the future. This Tony was really light on the link to be, so you shouldn't give him. But there's a huge concession. Losers lose on the link to be. We conceded that Biden doesn't push the plan because he hates the evidence from the 2AC. He read another card that said he supports strong PCA powers that is like restrictions, not only about police surveillance, but about military power, and it's specific to the that's praised at this. Biden PC, Biden will fight the plan and lose one. Losers lose when the president looks like he can't pass his agenda. He and lawmakers will calculate that it's not smart to support the president, which checks his PC. That's a Loomis evidence. Second, Biden will try to veto the plan because he hates it. That's politically damaging. Lose the PC. That's less like evidence known to your answer. Draw the line because I don't have a 3 and not the only 2 things that it's about police surveillance is not plan. We're not racial justice reform answer both, but you don't listen to anything else. They didn't extend the cut. The plan says are popular. The tech lobby likes the police surveillance stuff. Not contextual surprise. Evidence doesn't matter. We already conceded the savage evidence. The claims that was about the plan and rear-accusation savage evidence. They conceded the 1-year accusation means that Biden fights the plan. Racial reform just is now with the link about its actual military power, which you shouldn't give it to them. The text was really late with no specific garbage means 1, you don't give it to them because we read specific evidence of other fight trading up political capital. Second, the Hammett stuff is a floor time. Even if tech wants to fight for it, it'll never trade up with floor time. And mean Biden loses political capital right now. The uniqueness debate, the 2AC card was not extended, so you shouldn't give it to them. The 1NC Bloomberg evidence is great. It says it passes now. Biden is pursuing negotiation. Republicans have perceived that they're open and they've conceded that political capital is key. Even if there's some fights right now, it'll help Biden push it over the finish lines because they'll be able to convince lawmakers to support that. That's a Hammond evidence. The first card here, the Mazzaro evidence, is 10 days older than ours, which means you prefer, which is citing trends about cooperation happening right now, but it's only about Republicans fighting it. They've conceded the ROM evidence. It's only a question of reconciliation. Biden just has to convince Democrats because he'll be able to push the bill through other channels. The second card, the SALT warrant is new, which means you shouldn't give it to them, but I'll read new answers. White House open negotiations about a steward for 14. Many want to demonstrate the SALT deduction capital request, the debate over Dems move and infrastructure how to pay for it, just getting started political proposal on the table, including SALT, White House single open is no red light, but negotiations all wire for 16 conscious how to affect policy stance negotiate California demonstrating the same line. East Coast colleagues dream many people how they said to draw line and say specific policy. Pelosi and Schumer said they want to find a way to lift the cap. White House said it's open to give room with the cap up to Congress. Figure out how to pay for the next card here just about Trump, but it doesn't actually link why GOP would actually care about Trump's opinion. We've read evidence that GOP's cooperating right now. Second, it's only about tax reduction. Our Atlas evidence goes conceded. It says PC overcomes debt and tax concerns because Biden is going to be able to negotiate lawmakers, convince them onto the what? Manchi gave it a thumbs down. No, he didn't. Our evidence says that he's being able to cooperate right now. Right now, this is a new word, so you should strike it. But Biden's going to be able to convince him because he wants to support democratic legislation. The pick, I'm going to concede it just to test competition. No office on this whole constitutional kind. I'm going to concede it just to test competition. No office on the cyber advantage. No, collapse. Already evidence says attacks happen all the time, but infrastructure resilient, bounce back. We have redundancy systems built in. There are theoretical things about new attacks that could happen in the future are bad. One, there's no brink for why they'd actually be able to take out. Second, they cite specific examples of these attacks happening. Why didn't it take it down? Texas definitely disproves this scenario because it proves the grid is not connected. It doesn't matter if it was a natural disaster. It just proves resiliency is built in cyber attacks won't take out down only parts of it. There's no cyber collapse or redundancy. Patches are put in. The government is able to bounce back and implement new things in order to bring the grid back up as a jury and evidence, but there's no war or retaliation. Which means it doesn't escalate. The robot evidence indicates that it's taboo. The government won't want to respond with attack because it knows it'll get shunned on the international community. It doesn't remember if there's small attacks or rogue actors because our evidence is just about the impact of those attacks happening, which they won't. Japan, they won't spill over. Their evidence is really bad. The one AC evidence just says Japan has looked previously, not that it wants to do it, or the government is actually looking at it or has its political incentive to do it. It's really bad. The 2AC card is not Japan specific, so you shouldn't give it to them because it's not actually citing what Japan is looking at, which means it doesn't actually prove an internal link. The CMR advantage, there's definitely no impact. It's that it's Trump already packed with civilian jobs with military position, politicizing troops and drawing lines at this later evidence. You don't solve this because it's not just about surveillance, but actual restructuring of military, which Trump has done, and it's still durably happening under Biden, which means there's no impact. But we just need to thump one internal link, which this does to disprove their scenario. But there's no uniqueness for the impact that Davidson says there's been military and civilian fights under Obama, Kennedy, Johnson, Clinton. Why is it unique now? There's no terminal impact because overstretch has not happened before, won't happen in the future. Other all causes, the colon evidence indicates the societal problems, distrust in the military and allocated function. Second, the Sheikh evidence indicates it's outsourcing of power because the administration giving foreign power, leasing power to police and military right now creates fights and inevitably shifts the structure.
Okay, we have 2 minutes starting now. Okay. CMR advantage, cyber defense advantage, disad. Right. Can I get a thumbs up when people are good? Cool. The overstretch scenario is an independent impact that the 2NR is way too light on here. The military is overstretching in the status quo because they're focusing on local law enforcement because of violations of the PC, which stretches them too thin and prevents them from responding to other transnational crises like meltdowns, terrorism, and pandemics. There's no impact even to this scenario, which is the Springer evidence, by the way. That turns the military is key to respond to all of the competitive crises that it solves it because the military is key to respond to all the competitive crises that would happen without infrastructure. Because when people like China are testing us, we in order to have a credible military responses to those things that the military needs to be not overstretched into status quo. Now I'm going to go through all of the things that Trump stuff doesn't apply because it's about the interactions between civilian and the military, not whether or not the military has the capacity and capability to respond to these threats in the first place. Politicization isn't responsive for the same reason. Now that's restructuring of the military thing. It does not apply because the military doesn't solve because it's still only about what people perceive as violating CMR and overstretching and what people perceive as violating CMR, not the actual functions of what the military is doing in the status quo. Now the only responsive thing they said here, no or overstretch in the future argument, they just said no overstretch coming. It's happening in the status quo, which is the Springer evidence, because they're focusing too much on local law enforcement because of the PC, which is our uniqueness claim. Now the cyber defense advantage concede impact defense. I'm not going for it. Now dishead drop down to the uniqueness debate. Infrastructure will not pass now. 2EC Pindle says there are tons of funding to produce a load of different senators. Progressives want more, moderates want less. It's irresolvable in the status quo. We do get the 2EC evidence. The 1AR O'Donnell evidence indicates that there are 7 other Democrats who are also fighting over similar issues like the corporate tax rate. Biden does not have enough PC in the status quo to resolve all of these disputes because they are functionally irresolvable since everyone wants exactly opposite things. Now the 1C evidence gives absolutely zero warrants for what conflicts PC can resolve with modern Democrats, which is the only claim they have here. The only claim they have here is that PC can't solve these, but they have zero evidence saying what conflicts PC exactly can resolve, and no mechanism for getting that. The 1NR list evidence isn't even about modern Democrats, it's about Senate Republicans, of which they have said are not key to the internal link. The ROM evidence is only about bypassing Republicans by using reconciliation. We have said does not solve because of divisions within Democrats independently. The infrastructure won't pass now because of SALT. Primex says that there's massive pressure to repeal SALT in high tax Democratic states, and Democratic opposition is threatening to jeopardize the entire passage. They have it says. Their card says the White House is willing to negotiate. Not that those negotiations will be successful, and it addresses the White House has signaled some openness, but the small text says the matter is far from settled, which means they still have to iron out it means they have to iron out all these disputes. Now the no red line negotiations solve evidence. The second piece of evidence they read. Yeah, it says the White House willing to listen. Not that moderate or progressive Democrats will cave. The second piece of evidence they read here just says that. Yeah, it just says they have to find a way to remove the cap, but it's up to Congress to figure out how to pay for it, which means it doesn't grapple with all of the Democratic divisions things because they've read no evidence that PC can resolve those divisions in the status quo. The second piece of evidence is also only about California. We're talking about other senators like the New York senators or Maine senators from West Virginia. Now, unique should shape the direction of the link if you conclude the plan does not pass now or has a bad chance of passing now. Then there's only a chance that then there's only a risk that the plan might increase capital. I'll go to the link debate now. The links they extended, most of them are about police surveillance, not military surveillance, which is distinct. Now the losers lose thing they extended does not. Oh, actually, yeah, that's more important. No turns case. Their argument is lack of competitiveness in the status quo, but causes conflicts. Our internal link solves all of those conflicts because we're able to confront them with the military not being overstretched. We're able to confront those conflicts more effectively because we have more resources to do it, which means the infrastructure bill is not necessary. They have zero evidence grappling with this question. We have evidence on the Springer evidence, which says that the military is able to respond to those crises like the ones it talks about in their evidence. We have enough defense on the dised to mean that the AF's overstretch scenario outweighs because the 2NR did not deal with the overstretch scenario well enough, which means that if you conclude there's any chance that it won't pass in status quo, then the AF definitely outweighs, and the AF solves the impact anyway. Anything else, Tony?
mean, you can talk about their link cards not being.
That's fine. Good debate.
Good debate.
Good debate. I'm assuming judges will need card docs. Yeah, I'm gonna get that together right now. Net card doc was sent.
AF card doc is sent.
I think we have a decision. If everyone's here, I can announce it since I was the last one in. Good debate, everyone. I thought it was really close, and congrats for making it this far. The decision is a 2-1 for the affirmative from GBN.
Congrats, everybody. I voted negative. On the disadvantage, I hold the AF to a pretty high standard, specifically linking things from the 1AR to the 2AR. There are chunks of the 2AR that I kind of dismiss because they're extending things that weren't extended into the 1AR. And I think there are a couple of things that the 1AR did not extend that become a problem. So the uniqueness debate. Granted that I think it was novel of the AF to kind of exploit a few new arguments in the 1AR to try to problematize uniqueness, but I think that the NAIC has a good handle on these. First thing I'll point out is I think it is an issue for me that the AF does not refute the importance of political capital in the 1AR. This is a controlling issue that I think ultimately gives the negative the benefit of the doubt in my mind on some of these questions. One, that Biden has political capital now, and two, he's going to be able to use that to successfully get his way on the current things that are potentially holding up negotiations. So let's work through the three things that the 1AR said. The SALT stuff. In my mind, this evidence, while good and descriptive about 30 Democrats in the House and saying that it might be something that could derail infrastructure there, I think that the AF is, or that the NEG is able to get back against this AF argument with some stuff that they say in the 2NR and also the usage of political capital. I think the evidence that they do read says that, number one, this SALT caucus isn't, it doesn't necessarily want to derail infrastructure. It's just that this is a really important issue they want to negotiate over. And even within that SALT caucus, the California House Republicans aren't willing to sink infrastructure over it. So it's a smaller number than what the AF's card starts out with. And I think that, again, the political capital argument is one that's like, this is a point of contention now. And as long as the NEG's right that Biden has PC and he's going to get it done, it seems like he can overcome this. The second argument that was read, which was this funding and Trump approval argument, this Wasson evidence, I don't think is great. It's just about the GOP. And I think that since like most of the NEG's cards that say at the end of the day, if they couldn't get the GOP on board, they would just try to reconcile it with the Democrats that be able to get it done. So like a card by itself, I don't think is fantastic. And two, I don't think it gets around the nuance of the reconciliation argument. Probably the most important one is this Manchin moderate Democrats argument, but this card is fairly short. It's from early April. The NEG is reading multiple cards for a couple weeks later that talk about the current status of talks and how Biden is trying to court Manchin and is intentionally pursuing overtures with the GOP to try to keep Manchin on board. This card, when it speaks specifically to Manchin, said that he gave it a thumbs down at that time. And it wasn't to the point where like he would never be willing to get on board. So I think like when I keep saying these get on board arguments, I think this returns to as long as the AF fails to contest the political capital argument on the 1AR, and the NEG's like, well, that's the thing that's going to resolve all of these current negotiation issues. I think that any uncertainty about uniqueness is going to be ironed out and infrastructure will certainly pass. And I think like, however I cut it, the like, failure of the 2AR to really deal with the link debate, and especially some of the conceded link arguments the 1AR doesn't get to, makes me evaluate it this way. Like the link absolutely shapes the direction of uniqueness. I know uniqueness is somewhere between 0 and 100, probably closer to 100 than 0. But if I vote AF, it drops to 0. And I think that the impact to the disad like easily turns the affirmative, much more so than the AF turns the DA. Like the logic of the AF's argument about military overstretch and good CMR being able to control these existential risk impacts. Well, number one, it can only control for it if there's like strong economic primacy that makes the military possible. So I think that this is like a sequencing question, and a very logical sequencing question. I think the quality of the competitiveness evidence from the 1NC speaks directly to the backbone of the military, a strong economic strength. It goes further than that and also talks about the ability of the United States to manage a lot of these issues diplomatically would be undermined in a world of lagging competitiveness. And then it's also like external to all of this, it's got these impacts, which, you know, could be debated a little bit more, but it's like a tiebreaker argument. There's like the climate change stuff, the pandemic stuff. Like I had no idea how the military solves that stuff. So I think that this absolutely turns the case, and it has external impacts to that. Like, I'll be curious to hear where I perhaps missed something given on the bottom here, but like I think that uniqueness wasn't enough to make me think that the risk of the decided was low. I thought it was very, very high. I already explained how the political capital argument is really important. That's not really in the 1AR. I think that was a concession of an important link argument from the block that wasn't in the 1AR. And I think we have to think about, well, what turns the other case versus the dissat, or the dissat turns case. I just think that economic competitiveness is key to military primacy and not the other way around. But happy to hear what my peers have to say.
Yeah, I can go next. That makes sense to me, but I did see the debate pretty differently. I think that the largest problem for the neg was a lack of 2NR responsiveness to the military overstretch scenario to the AF, which I thought was really large. And I thought that the 1NR did not respond to 2AC uniqueness evidence about democratic unity that made the dissat a lot smaller in my mind. But I'll talk about case first, because I thought there was a pretty high risk that the AF solved a litany of existential threats that would arise absent military resources and attention. I thought that it would have helped the 2NR a ton to contextualize like historical fights within the military and politicization with the military to the military overstretched scenario, especially because I thought the 1AR distinguished these scenarios and said that they comprise separate internal links. The Springer evidence is pretty good on how military forces are morphing into a quasi law enforcement agency, which makes them incapable of responding to existential threats like terrorists and a nuclear reactor failure. So I just didn't really think the 2NR responded to this at all. I do wish that the 2AR did a bit more impact comparison, given that you aren't contesting the internal link or impact to infrastructure, which might have been able to help with some of the like turns case stuff that was a problem in the other RFT, but obviously that didn't lose you the debate for me. In terms of the dissat, as I mentioned, I thought that the neg would be in a significantly better spot had the 1NR grappled with like the very two cards that are in the AF doc from Pendel and Casella from the 2AC. They both substantiate arguments about democratic unity that are important, given that we all agree reconciliation is the way infrastructure will attempt to be passed. This AF evidence I thought was extended in the 1AR, and there was like more evidence read to substantiate it, which describes how progressives are already fighting over how much will be spent. Moderates are upset because of the corporate tax hike. And even if these liberals are just like posturing to get what they want, the Pendle evidence is pretty explicit on this might even prevent a vote from occurring on the floor. The Casella evidence is also great on fights within the Democratic Party preventing passage. So importantly, no 1NR evidence that I was able to parse through is really responsive to this. The Casella evidence is more so treated in the 1NR like a thumper at the end of the speech, and the only warrant responded to in Pendel is the warrant about Republicans, which, like I said, we all agree is like irrelevant because reconciliation is how the bill is going to get done. The ROM evidence provided was indicted by the 1AR and 2AR. It just says that Democrats will use reconciliation and quote Schumer, but it doesn't say that will be successful or that fights within the party will be resolved. The 2NR says PC solves these things, and I guess that was less important to me in terms of my decision because the card that I was like pointed to in the doc was from Ellis, but that's more so about Republicans getting on board with infrastructure as a result of Biden's PC, not Democrats. And even if Biden is like open to negotiations, I don't know how those negotiations will resolve these like fundamentally different demands among liberal Democrats and moderates. I think that just had this question been more properly addressed in the 1NR, the dissat would be bigger and the decision would have been a lot tougher because I think that the neg is doing a great job on the link debate and the like turns case stuff that was said before makes a ton of sense to me. I just thought that there was like kind of a technical concession that made it difficult to vote on the dissat, and then the risk of case I just assigned like a much larger risk to.
Yeah, so before I give my RFD, I don't know if you two are seniors or not, but if you are, congratulations on an excellent debate journey. I enjoyed watching the debate a lot, and I liked your 1NC and block strategy, and I thought you two were really excellent. So you should feel proud of what you've accomplished, and I hope if you're debating in college, I hope you continue to pursue that. I guess my primary divergence from Monday was just that I thought the case was a lot bigger and I didn't assign as much weight to these PC key arguments and kind of given the way I guess I'll just work through it. So the case, I read through all your defense to confirm that it does not apply. I gave you the full weight of basically everything in your cards, and I struggled to find something that answered this overstretch thing. And the one analytic argument you make that there's, may not be overstretched now, it might occur in the future. It's sort of going back to 1AC Crossix has been litigated against you. The 2AR effectively answers this. I agree there. Don't give the F the turns case thing. The negative story makes sense. It is sort of new in the 2AR. But then given the case is largely unmitigated, the only negative ballot I can construct is that the DA is so big and it turns so much of the case that it's like, and it outweighs an unmitigated advantage. And I don't think your uniqueness arguments get there. So the 2AC Pendel evidence says progressives and moderates are questionably on board. I agree the Casella evidence is about Republicans, so it's irrelevant. And then they have this O'Donnell card that kind of supports the Pindell evidence that says Manchin and what is it, like 6 or 7 other Democrats can't support the taxes. So I can just go through everything I have the 2NR saying. First, you say the Bloomberg evidence. Well, this says GOP support. It does not support the negative on passes now. The second argument, PC solves. So I'm just struggling to find a card that says political capital means all the evidence you've read that says it's up in the air means it's like 100% going to pass or even likely to pass. And I get the theoretical component of it, and I'll grant you all the evidence you've read on it's a negotiable issue could mean that it's likely to pass, but it's not like when the case is dropped, the burden for you is not just likely to pass. It's got to be like close to 100% of the DA. And I don't think this PC argument really gets you there. The third argument, you say your evidence is 10 days more recent, maybe for this O'Donnell card, but not for the Pindell card. And it's also not really impacted in a way that says the issue that the O'Donnell evidence talks about in the last 10 days has changed. I read all your evidence in addition to this to confirm like maybe there's a warrant that I'll give you credit for. Your ROM evidence says that it can and not would. They're open to it, which sort of supports the AF characterization of this is speculative. It's saying that it might occur, not that it will be effective, or they'd use the reconciliation process, not that that would work. Your Ellis evidence says they may be amenable. I agree with the 2AR characterization of it, that it's about Republicans. It also may contradict your Bloomberg evidence. Then the last thing I checked is, does this SALT evidence you've read maybe help you? So I said, fine, give it to the neg, because if I don't evaluate it, I don't think the bill is likely to pass. Your 2NR1 evidence, or so just the 1AR evidence is quite definitive. It says it would jeopardize passage. They have another line in another card that says passage is not likely. Your first 2NR arguments, as many Democrats agree, but the 2AR has re-highlighted a line that says it is far from settled. Maybe your PC key argument from above could help you here, but it doesn't, again, just doesn't rise to the level of they have a card that says passage is not likely, and you have a card that says it is far from settled. I struggle to see how that evidence says PC means it will pass. The second 2NR card says it's, I can't read what I've written here, but it's basically similar. Like, how do they pay for it? It says there's a debate that Pelosi and Schumer may be open to, not really rising to the level of this bill will pass with 50 Democratic votes. The only other neg ballot I could construct is like try or die. The DA turns so much of the case, but I don't think that's a ballot I felt comfortable writing on just any risk of DA outweighs, given the case is also very large. Ultimately, I just concluded the chance that the plan derails, the bill is unlikely to pass. The plan derails it is less likely than the chance they solve a military overstretch scenario.
Bella, Nicole, do you all have questions? Okay. Then the main question I have is just about the losers lose link thing, which Monday you kind of talked about the most, I think. In the 2AR, I was kind of just looking at it and unsure how to answer it because the 1AR didn't. Do you have thoughts on how I could have dealt with that?
For me, there's nothing you can do. When the 1AR concedes a giant chunk of the link wall, I'm not going to give the 2AR much leeway on that. That's a 1AR fix.
For myself, I guess maybe I just think of uniqueness and link as much more by nature segregated components of the debate, but you could definitely answer the one line the 2NR has that says PC solves X issue. You say, well, why does it resolve X issue? There's not really a warrant and there's not really a card. And that was enough for me because I did not find a card that says with Biden's pressure, these issues will get resolved, but you should warrant that a little more. Biden is, maybe cite some history about the stimulus bill, or, I can think of many arguments you can make, and some of that I'd give you credit for, but I agree, 1AR should move some of that time here, maybe pick an advantage, and then you'd get some time more on the DA.
Were there other time allocation like tips besides kicking an advantage that the 1AR could have done? Like, was like any arguments that needed less coverage?
I mean, between 1AC, 2AC, like every AF speech, there was maybe 30 to a minute of dead time of just like, do you have X card? So that's, you've got like a whole rebuttal to give in that time between. So just always stack your doc with like extra stuff at the bottom. Like it, especially in the 1AC, it shouldn't be like, I have extra time, please slide me cards. Just, 2AC, 1AC, 1AR, just add extra cards to read if you have time. And I think, that 4 or 5 more cards on politics is like what the end result of that would have been.
Yeah, I also think for me, like I guess it's a more specific 1AR comment, but I thought that like the Space Force counterplan was less threatening than the like clearly Constitution counterplan, I guess is what it was called in the 1NC. So I think that the 1AR, I mean, I guess this wouldn't free up a ton of time, but maybe spending a little more time on the clearly Constitution counterplan. And I didn't think the Space Force counterplan was amazing for the like last argument you made about their evidence being like, for the Space Force to be successful, we need to do these things that the counterplan doesn't fiat. And then the argument about like maybe in the long term becoming a law enforcement agency. I don't know. I just thought that like maybe taking time from like the Space Force counterplan or something would benefit you.
Also, if I may add, I really thought you were going for I thought you should have gone for the QPQ, the court counterplan.
I was trying to judge reactions to that because it is a pretty like abusive counterplan, I feel like. But, like, did you think we were okay on like the perm do both debater stuff, or like, I don't know.
I mean, that's like, if you don't think you could beat perm do both, like maybe don't extend the counterplan.
Well, yeah, obviously. I mean, I know the counterplan a little more, and on a truth level, I feel like it's sketchy there. But in perception, we're like, I guess our explanation's okay and making sense, because I felt like at times it was getting messy.
You just needed a single substantive answer, like, because there's no deficit in the 2AC. So if the perm doesn't solve 100% of your net benefit,
that makes sense. Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I thought the way you explained the counterplan, like it was pretty clear to me, like what the internal link to the net benefit was based on the like process or whatever of the bill being attached to it. I don't know. I thought that, yeah, I totally agree with that. I also thought your explanation made sense, and that would have been like a better 2NR. But also, like, I should have echoed earlier that like you all are great. I've judged you multiple times, and this was a really good debate.
I was leaning on the limited intrinsicness permutation, since the net benefit is not germane to the there's no real opportunity cost to the plan, and I think that AF block on limited intrinsicness justified was persuasive to me. Absent a solvency deficit, mitigation of the net benefit, not a big issue, but I definitely think that the ability of this counterplan to solve its net benefit is poor. Sure, if the new clearly constitutional process becomes institutionalized because of this counterplan, a lot still has to happen for Democrats to actually pass something to solve warming. To me, I feel like there is a very big question as to whether or not that would even be possible, because they still have to propose those things and muster the votes in Congress to get cap and trade and a carbon tax on the floor, which is what your internal link evidence suggests they could try, but by no means says they would even be able to do. So that's another issue for me, but the intrinsicness one was probably the one that was catching my attention the most.
We don't have any more questions if GBN doesn't either.
I think we're all good.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for judging.
Thank
Good
you
luck,
so
y'all.
much. Good luck, Keelan. Good luck, Tony.
Thank you. Good debate, y'all.